The Cambridge Foundation Year is a one-year course in the Arts, Social Sciences and Humanities offered by the University of Cambridge and taught by a dedicated team of teaching associates. It welcomed its first cohort of almost 50 students in September 2022, and it is now in its third year. It is a distinctive course because it's designed to act as a stepping stone to Cambridge for talented students who have been prevented from realising their potential due to educational disadvantage or disruption. Students who gain a place on the programme will have demonstrated a high level of academic promise, and they will be looking to spend some more time developing skills and habits that will enable them to flourish in a university context. On the programme, each student will make their own way through a vast curriculum by choosing papers or modules that align with their own interests. They might learn about religions in South Asia, for example, or study King's College Chapel and its historical and political significance, or take a paper on data and policy making in the COVID pandemic. And should students on the programme complete the course to a required academic standard, they will be able to progress onto a degree course at Cambridge, a TRIPOS course. 18 subjects across the arts, humanities and social sciences are currently progression subjects at Cambridge, everything from English to history, land economy to linguistics. In this podcast and in subsequent podcasts in this series, we will be seizing the Foundation Year programme as a case study for thinking through this broader theme of teaching and learning in an interdisciplinary way. Because the Foundation Year is an entirely interdisciplinary enterprise. Each of his papers are taught by 2 or 3 lecturers and supervisors who have different disciplinary specialisms. What's more, the learning objectives of these papers and modules take seriously the task of looking at certain themes and topics from a variety of disciplinary perspectives. A student studying religion in South Asia, for example, will be invited to do so from the perspectives of sociology, anthropology, political theory, as well as philosophy and theology and religious studies. There are lots of questions we could start to ask here about the topic of teaching and learning in an interdisciplinary context. How do you ensure fair assessment in a context like this? How do you induct students into particular disciplines, all the while teaching them in an environment where they encounter lots of different ones at once? On today's podcast, we want to begin our discussions by focusing in on student experience. What is it like to be a student on the Foundation Year and to learn in an interdisciplinary way? What sorts of challenges does such a student encounter? Can interdisciplinary learning prepare a person adequately for going on to do a particular degree course? In order to discuss and answer these questions today, I am joined by 3 guests, and 2 of my guests are students. Jayden completed the Foundation Year programme in 2023 and is today a second-year undergraduate on the History Tripos at Fitzwilliam College. Hello, Jayden.
Hello, Ruth.
Is there anything else you want to highlight about what you do at the university?
I am a former JCR president. I served in my first year, so after the Foundation Year, and I am also a Stormzy scholar, so I managed to secure that in my first year after the Foundation Year as well.
Amazing. Well, it's good to have you on the podcast, and we're also joined by Elijah, and you're a student at Queen's College, and you're currently studying the Foundation Year, aren't you? So would you like to tell us what subject you like to do at Tripos?
Hi, Ruth. I'd like to progress to education, and I'm also currently JCR Class Act Officer, so do a lot around supporting other students from underrepresented backgrounds.
Yeah, thank you. So if you want to mention those aspects to your student experience when we're talking today, that'd be really nice. And my final guest is Alex Price, who is the director of the Foundation Year programme. And I hope you won't mind me saying, Alex, that your own research and academic background is contemporary Northern Irish poetry and feminism. And you regularly contribute, don't you, to the teaching of the programme and to examining the programme, as well as directing everything from the top.
Yes, yeah. So I've been around on the Foundation Year since it started, really. So actually, some of the curriculum were also things that I was kind of designing as well. So so it's been quite a long journey, and yeah, I do like to contribute to the teaching when you guys will let me.
We let you quite a lot, don't we? And well, my name's Ruth Jackson Ravenscroft, and I'm hosting things today, and I'm a member of the Foundation Year teaching team. So let's talk about student experience. So the first kind of questions I've got are some openers. And Alex, the first thing I wanted to ask you is what you hope personally students who do the programme will get out of it as a learning experience.
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a lot of things that we're seeking to do with the foundation year. And I think one of the most important things is that students enjoy the process of learning. And obviously the process of learning can have highs and lows, but ultimately we want students to enjoy their time and to use it productively to achieve their own goals. But I guess at the kind of the granular level, the course is a bridge between the kind of learning that's required at level 3, whether that's kind of school, college, A-level, access to HE course. But it's a bridge between that and what we do at university, because it is quite a different kind of learning that we do. And also to build back confidence. Many of our students have had non-standard journeys through education. They've encountered challenges. And I think building their confidence in their own abilities, and particularly in building confidence in things like critical thinking and expressing their ideas, is something else. And also building that independence. That's one of the key differences between what they've done before and what they do with us is kind of that independence of study and independence of thinking. And then finally, curiosity about subjects. Many of our students arrive with a certain subject in mind, but with us, we stimulate them to consider things that they haven't considered before. So they might end up going on to a different course than they initially thought. And also developing that perseverance with things that they're maybe not as interested in as well. That's a kind of unknown aspect of it. Is students are going to struggle with things that maybe isn't what they want to study all the time, and actually that perseverance is really important for when you go on to a degree, because even in a subject that you love, there will be parts of it that you don't love. We both know that. And then finally, just practice of all the stuff that you need to do to be a student. So, expressing your ideas, reading, working to a deadline, general time management. That's all stuff that you can get through the foundation year. But those are, I guess, our main aims. But the most important thing is that students are happy and healthy and enjoying their studies.
I'd say that's a very good aim. But I do like what you said about challenge, that this is meant to be a challenging course, and in being challenging, it can perhaps change people's perspectives and attitudes. And maybe this is something we'll come on to a bit later as well. Elijah, because you're currently studying with us, could you tell us a little bit about some of the papers you've taken on the FY this year? What kind of themes do they have?
Yeah, so building a bit on what Alex said, actually, I think it's most useful to start with a paper that I found particularly challenging, which was the Richard III paper, because I hadn't really studied anything to do with history since about year 8. So it was something quite new to me, looking at obviously a historical king. But something that I felt was quite useful was the interdisciplinary approach of the paper, because alongside looking at the history and theology, we also got to kind of apply it to a modern context and look at the contribution of the discovery of Richard III to the economy of Leicester and kind of what that means. So I found that to be a really interesting experience. And I also really enjoyed the paper on COVID-19 and data, because it was really interesting to kind of look at an event that was so recent and look at it through the lens of kind of data and social sciences. So yeah, it's been great so far.
Good. I'm really glad to hear it. And it sounds like those are two things that are very different. On the one hand, you've got like this very socially familiar experiential thing like COVID that you've all engaged with on a personal level, but then you have to do it academically. And then you've got something, like you said, that you'd not gone anywhere near. The idea of studying archaeologically Richard III is something that put you way out of your comfort zone, but it was energising by the sounds of it. Definitely. I think even though it was really uncomfortable at first, I think, as Alex said, it helped me develop a perseverance. And even though I might not have found it enjoyable at all times, it was really putting myself out of my comfort zone, which has helped me in other areas of my life quite a lot, I think, as well. Good. Here's to challenge. Jayden, what I wanted to ask you was a bit about the way that the FY assesses its students, because it's not necessarily how students will go on to be assessed in the rest of their degree, is it?
Yeah, so you're assessed in a few ways. You're assessed through essays that are set throughout the year. You're also assessed through an extended project, which is about 5,000 words, which allows you to go deep into one subject. And then at the end of the year, there is a big exam that you can prepare for. And I think what's really striking for me is that this year, that year of foundation has really prepared me for what I've done this year, in that I've had to submit an extended project of 5,000 words this year. I've had to submit an essay that was 2,000 words that's going to be assessed. And then now I have 2 exams that I have to prepare for. And so compared to my peers, I feel like I've done this before. And because I've done this before, I've had the opportunity to have strategies that I've tested, and I know exactly what works for me and what doesn't work for me. And I really think that has put me ahead of a lot of different people. And so I think that the balance of the different ways that you're assessed in the foundation year is excellent, because of course, while it is lucky for me that I've had the pleasure of having the exact same assessment, I have other friends that were in my cohort, so the first cohort, who are not assessed in the same way, but that different kind of, the mixture of different styles means that they also got to test various different strategies, and they've employed them now. And genuinely, I have friends that haven't done the foundation yet, and they're writing a 5,000 word project for the first time, and they don't know quite how to gauge, how much time to give to it, or what style it should be written in, or how much depth you can go, or like what even topic to pick. And these are things that we've all had the pleasure of having done before.
Yeah, so because you've already done it, you can be free to think. You can even, like, the academic stuff is actually what is at the top of your mind rather than the practical stuff.
Yeah.
So that's really amazing. And I hadn't actually realised how close foundation year continuous assessment was to your experience of history as well. Yeah. So that's really interesting. My final starter question is for you, Alex. And just to get a sense of, after the FY, what kinds of subjects do students go on to do?
Yeah, so as you said in the introduction, the focus of the course is on arts, humanities and social sciences, but within that there's such a broad range. Students do end up studying the full range of courses that we offer. Most of our students remain at Cambridge, so for us the focus is on preparing them for the kind of learning, like Jayden's just said, that happens here. But others also can end up attending academically selective other universities, particularly Russell Group universities. So we're also looking at kind of keeping things that are very transferable to other environments as well. And I think, the broad range of subjects in scope, I think there's very few subjects at this stage in year 3 that we haven't sent a student on to at this point. I think there's maybe 1 or 2, but we're hoping that we can fix that in future years and have sent someone to every subject. But certainly there is a wide range. There's some clustering around maybe the bigger subjects, subjects like history or law, but certainly, lots of broad range of interests, and the interests come from the students themselves, not from us.
Thank you. So now hopefully everyone's got quite a good idea about what the programme is and what's entailed in it. I think we can get quite conceptual now, because the next question I wanted to ask all of you is, given either your experiences on the FY or given, Alex, your experience coming up with the foundation year as an enterprise, how would you define interdisciplinarity? What is it to work in an interdisciplinary context? Who wants to go first?
I'd like to hear what the students think first.
I guess my definition would be, because when I kind of started to really think about what the foundation year could do for me, I think I actually researched what interdisciplinary was, or interdisciplinarity was. And there is a difference between that and multidisciplinarity, right? And so I think that the emphasis is that the different disparate parts feed on each other. They come together in different parts, they enhance each other. And I think that is definitely what I experienced in the foundation year, where I have a lot of interests that necessarily don't normally kind of go together. So I really like philosophy, for instance. But philosophy and history don't normally kind of go together. And in the foundation year, funnily enough, I would have philosophy/history supervisions. And so I think it was through the experience of supervisions in the foundation year that I really started to understand what interdisciplinarity can do for someone in terms of education, because I found that thinking about things philosophically enhanced my analytical ability, and then I could look at a historical source and go, okay, that's a lot easier to look at because of the philosophy basis I had before that. So I think it's definitely about the different parts kind of coming together.
Yeah, lovely. So you've made that distinction between multidisciplinarity as well, where we're thinking of each discipline in its own box. Essentially, they're remaining kind of parallel to one another, aren't they? They're not mingling. But you've described this experience of them kind of coming together and even doing them at the same time, so you can kind of focus on a question and see that particular focus through different angles and from different perspectives. Has that been your experience, Elijah?
Definitely. I think to kind of build on Jaden's point, I think something really interesting has been the ability to work together with a really wide range of people that you might not have otherwise had the opportunity to work with. And it's very topical, I think. So for the example of the Richard III paper, I've had the opportunity to work with students who will be progressing to subjects like theology and land economy, and all look at the same issue and kind of bring together our own perspectives to understand it and kind of understand the implications of the topic we're looking at, which has been really interesting. I don't think there's many students who get the opportunity to work across disciplines all together towards one end goal. So it's been great.
That's a really nice thing to know, because Alex, from our perspective when we're teaching it, all our questions are about how we do it, how we're sort of choreographing the teaching to happen so that when we're co-teaching, we're not disagreeing with one another, we're not making things more confusing for the students. But what you're saying, Elijah, is that actually from the student side, you're seeing yourselves emerging already as like historians, theologians, and the questions that you'll bring in a particular seminar will have a certain flavour. And it's really nice to be reassured, because what would you answer this question with, Alex?
Yeah, so I mean, we've talked about inter and multi and kind of the difference between the two. I think our course is kind of both at once. So it's kind of multidisciplinary just in the fact that it simply does include a wide range of disciplines, and that's just the way it's set up. But it's also interdisciplinary, because what we're really trying to do, I guess, from our end at the teaching side, is we're trying to get a student attuned to how the different disciplines actually talk to each other and relate, and where the limits of one discipline kind of might end and where another one might start. And I feel like actually whenever it comes to our practice, that's something that we've come to. It's not something that we necessarily had maybe thought about too much before we actually sat down to do the teaching planning. And also we experience it as well in our kind of practice, and then we're kind of passing it on to the students as well. So I think it's something that we're kind of mediating. Interdisciplinarity is something that we are sensitive to, and trying to communicate to the students in a way that is something that they can grasp and not confuse them. I think that's always the risk with it, is when you're bringing people into new ideas, but then you're trying to communicate where the limits of those are, that can feel confusing. Especially, we often have slight disagreements. I'm sure this will come up in the teaching podcast about kind of, oh, well, a historian does it this way. Oh, well, an English literature person does it this way. And actually that is why I think it is a mediation sometimes at the teaching side, certainly. Absolutely.
Who wins? It's not that clear cut sometimes, is it? I think we'll get into the challenges. I want to ask you all about challenges next. Alex, you mentioned on the teaching side, we sometimes find it difficult sometimes, not necessarily to sympathise, but to see how someone else might teach the same topic from a different angle. But part of the process that you're learning about is how that's possible. And as teachers, we learn a lot. But I'm interested in what the students might like to say about this. Are there challenges from your perspectives when it comes to learning in an interdisciplinary context like this?
I think from my own experience, not so much, because education is inherently an interdisciplinary subject. So I kind of came into the foundation year very prepared that even when I progress, I'm going to be looking through the lens of quite a few disciplines. But I think maybe for students that come in with a very strong idea that they wish to study history or philosophy, it can be quite difficult to adapt to new ways of thinking and having to consider lenses which you might not have thought about before. But I feel like it's something that people adapt to quite well, and it's really useful for resilience in the future and the fact that you might have to kind of adapt to new ways of thinking. So overall, I feel like people overcome that challenge quite well.
I think, building on what Elijah said, I'm one of those people that has an intrinsic kind of disposition towards one type of discipline, and that discipline, funnily enough, is not history. I've struggled with history since secondary school, basically, to the point where even after progressing from the foundation year, every supervisor would tell me that my essay was too philosophical rather than historical. But I do think that the foundation year gave me the foundation, ironically, to be able to now have shifted over to being more historical. And that is because initially in the foundation year, through the papers I took, whether it was Richard III, even though at that time I wasn't really good at the historical stuff, it showed me how to become good at that. And so because I knew from foundation year how to do that, throughout the first year, I was working towards a standard that I knew existed rather than kind of just being thrown in and, they're saying, oh, you're too philosophical, and I don't really know what that means. I knew exactly what I had to do to improve. So I think for me, there are definitely people that are like hard-tuned to one kind of thinking, but through going through an interdisciplinary education, you do see the other kind of disciplines and how they work, and that gives you the basis to try and work towards kind of getting closer to them.
Yeah. And do you have a sense now, when they say you're too philosophical, do you know what that means?
Yeah, 100%. And the funny thing is that philosophy, actually going deeper into philosophy taught me how to be more historical. And it was that the way I was thinking about evidence wasn't historical enough. I wasn't closely tuned to evidence. I was going off in kind of tangents and stuff. And so when I really started I took a philosophy paper this year. And when my supervisor told me you need to have textual evidence all throughout your essay, that completely changed the way I then engaged with history, where I was like, okay, I can't just talk about a source and then go off on a tangent. I need to refer to the source all the time. And so I think that's how those two subjects really fed nicely together to make me better at the one that I wasn't initially good at.
That's nice. It's like, the idea of keeping the source in front of you. I see that with my own students, because it's like Elijah says, education's very interdisciplinary in theology, religion, and philosophy. Religion, it's in the title, isn't it? So you do see students having to make these adaptations. But it sounds like you've been developing these different methodological approaches that you can distinguish between them, and that you're able to then select the most appropriate one perhaps for the assignment you've been given. And that's the other kind of follow-up question I wanted to ask you guys is, did you in Jayden's case, and do you in Elijah's case, experience the assessments in a way that's similar to what you've been saying, not necessarily confusing, because rather than saying write an essay in the style of an English scholar, it will perhaps ask you a specific question and then give you some resources. When navigating, therefore, the assessments, do you likewise find it possible to do that? It's not confusing, you know what's asked of you?
I think so, and I think to build on that a little bit, it really gives students the skills to kind of read a question and understand what the examiner might actually be asking of them, rather than directly saying. You get to understand kind of what the subtext is, and you get to do the reading and kind of draw your own conclusions. So even though if it was probably a little bit tricky at first, now I think I have a better ability to look at a question and know what it's really asking me and kind of address it more directly. I definitely found that quite hard in Michaelmas maybe initially, but now I've seen the progress in my assessments that kind of reflect being able to do that.
It's really nice being able to reflect back and actually say to yourself, I wouldn't have had a clue what this meant when I arrived, but now you've kind of, it's about genre and recognition of style, isn't it? Learning how to read an exam question. So well done. And Jayden, did you find the same, that when you were sort of given these assignments, that there wasn't this initial anxiety about, okay, what discipline do they want me to be? It was more about just focusing on the question in front of you.
Yeah, and I think the way that the examinations were structured was really, it kind of enhanced my overall kind of academic ability, because now it wasn't the case where I look at the question and I know, okay, I need to X, Y, Z, right? It was, they're asking something just like what Elijah says, and there is a way I have to engage with this. What is the best way I think I can engage with the actual subject? And again, reflecting back to my experience this year, in history, you kind of have a paper where you go away from normal history and you look at the history of history, right? The different ways that different disciplines have kind of emerged. And my supervisor said to me that he thinks that because I did the foundation year, this shift was really easy, because I don't look at questions and think, okay, well, in history you do X, Y, Z. I kind of try and figure out the best way to do that. And that is only from the foundation that I kind of developed that. And so I think that's a really good example of how the style of examination really teaches you to get to the heart of what education really is, which is we're not just kind of trying to do one style of subject in one style of way, but really just trying to engage with questions.
That's really helpful. Thank you both. Have you got any sort of senses, Alex, about what you think students have tended to find challenging?
Yeah, I think certainly the first term transition to university is hard for anyone, but I think particularly with our course, we're often taking people who often do have an idea of where they want to end up, a certain subject, and we're taking them from an environment where the syllabus has very much been kind of quite prescribed as to what the learning outcomes are, and then we throw them into this environment and we kind of say, oh no, all of that's gone. So I think that first term can be a hard transition to kind of move from certainty to kind of uncertainty and existing in that space where there is no right answer and where the instructions do require a bit of work. And I think the other thing that sometimes students do find challenging is this idea that within this curriculum, when is the law content arriving is kind of a common, when do I get to do my subject? And kind of, as if they're waiting for it to arrive. And it's quite hard to say, no, it's all around us. You're learning the things that you need for that, even if the topic doesn't necessarily sound like it. And that can be quite hard to communicate to students and also to get them to trust in us. And to trust in us that, they will get there by the end of the year and they will come to understand that. But it is confusing. And I think the other thing that certainly initially, I think it's become less so as we as a team have maybe gotten better at communicating it. But initially I remember students kind of saying, you're telling me that you want my essay to look like this, but then I go to my other paper and my supervisor there tells me that my essay has to look like this. And I'm confused and I don't know what the answer is. So I think that's probably something I think that'll probably come out in your discussion with the rest of the teaching team as well. But I think that's something else is students sometimes struggle when we're telling them things that they think sound like they don't make sense, but actually they do make sense just to us. And helping them get to that understanding as well.
Yeah, that's right. Is this just the personal preference of an individual supervisor? Because that can happen even within triposes, can't it? You be on a very specific tripos and you get different advice from different supervisors. Or is this, is this the law? Must I write essays like this, but then this other person's telling me that something else is the law, and how do I overcome this clear contradiction in order to get the marks I need? So it's all these levels of stress, isn't it? And I can understand, and I think you're right. Since the programme began, we've been taking this on a lot more in our teaching practice, haven't we? So even when we're trying to introduce advice, we will sort of sometimes say, okay, you can do it in other ways, however, this is how I would recommend you do it. And even that doesn't necessarily make it easier to navigate, but at least can indicate to students that this is not the only way. So you're right. I can, and it's been really great to hear from both of our students that actually it is navigatable, as it were, and that this is something that interdisciplinarity brings its own positives, which we'll get onto in a second. But before we do, Alex, first of all, I wanted to ask you about the way that we organise our curriculum, because as we've been talking about, we divide it up into lots of different modules, and this extended project that Jayden mentioned as well. But we also have this strategy to put our papers into particular streams, don't we? So we have textual source papers, we have material source papers, data papers, and papers that focus on languages. In your view, do you think that organising the teaching like this can contribute to a more focused interdisciplinary learning experience for the students? I'll ask you first, and then I'll see what the students think.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say conclusively because we haven't ever structured our teaching in another way. Yep. But obviously lots of other courses do structure it differently, and they can work in their context as well. For me, I think that there's some evidence that the streams probably don't have that much of a really defining impact on this aspect. Others might disagree, but within the teaching team, people are often teaching across different streams. We also do often seek out the connections between papers that often go within stream but also go without stream. So to take an example of post-coloniality as a kind of theory, it comes into a textual sources paper about Windrush poetry. It reappears then in another textual paper on South Asian religions, but it also comes into various other bits in material sources, in the human body and art, in the data paper. Those kind of ideas do appear in kind of everything in some way or other. And what we're then trying to think about then is, okay, if we take this concept across these different kinds of sources, how do we teach this to students in a way that helps them to see, the kind of the interconnections and the limitations of where they shouldn't be using something. I would say, I think the streams basically just offer, I guess, some form of order in the intellectual chaos, because actually you have a boundary, and boundaries sometimes can be quite a good thing, because, in this paper you're only looking at text, or you're only looking at objects, because otherwise I think it could become pretty overwhelming. And I think, particularly because we are often working at pace, we've only got these 3 8-week terms to actually teach students with, and they've got some distance to travel in that time. So sometimes perhaps they create a helpful boundary for the students as well as for us.
Focus.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think so too? I'm looking at Elijah at the moment.
I think so, but I also think, especially in the first term, it can be quite difficult, because obviously you're being taught that both there are these streams that you have to complete depending on progression subject, but also you're being taught that everything's interdisciplinary and it all links with each other, and it can be kind of contrasting messaging. But I think by the time you get to second term, people kind of understand that it, as you said, it's kind of a rough outline and it's a boundary, but there is going to be like interconnection, and I think it can be quite useful still, because obviously there's a common theme in the data papers, and it's a similar structure of teaching a lot of the time, so I found it quite useful to have the streams, even if it was confusing at first.
And have you focused on a particular stream, or have you sort of dotted around?
I came into the foundation year knowing that I wanted to try at least one paper from every stream. So in first term, I did one textual, one data, and one material sources. And I realised that material sources wasn't necessarily my thing. So in the last 2 terms, I've done more of a focus on the language papers and the data papers. But I've really enjoyed being able to jump around streams a little bit and not feeling too restricted into one stream. But I feel like it was a little bit easier for me because my progression subject didn't have any required streams, so I really got that freedom to kind of explore.
Yeah, thank you. And what about you, Jaden? Did you hop around? Did you find the streams like a helpful boundary line, as Alex said?
Yeah, it was helpful for me in the sense that I knew what I liked before I came, just roughly, not in terms of specific subjects, but I knew that I liked textual stuff. So I was like, okay, I'll probably take the textual one each time. Then it was like, okay, do I like languages? Do I like data? And I was like, okay, I think the secondary one for me is data. And so all throughout the foundation year, I picked textual and data streams. And I think it was very useful for me to settle down because I did come here kind of really exploring what I wanted to do. And it really helped with actually picking progression subjects because when I looked at the subject and I looked at what it required, it gave me a sense of what it kind of could do for me or what it would entail. And so that was like, okay, it helped me really, because at some point I had 6 subjects in mind. And so then I could look at subjects and go, okay, well, there's a material element to that, so I'm not really too interested in that. So that can be cut. So it did really help me in terms of progression.
Yeah, that's helpful. So now I thought, we've discussed potential challenges. Let's think about positives. We've already spoken about some of these and benefits perhaps, but let's focus on, were there any particularly exciting things that you found, both of you, about learning in this way? Are there any examples of, you've mentioned paper 6 already, Elijah, but is there another example maybe that you've got of being in an interdisciplinary space, maybe a data paper, for example, and realising all of these different points of intersection coming together?
I think to kind of answer that question, kind of not, building on what I said before, I think it's made me more of a risk taker, because I think coming into the foundation year, I was one of the people that was very sure what I wanted to do, and I knew what I was good at, and at first I thought it would be best to stick at what I knew I was going to be good at, but I think doing a very interdisciplinary course has really pushed me to take more risks. Like, for example, I was quite nervous about doing a language paper because it was a little bit out of my comfort zone. Because previously I was very, very strongly social sciences oriented, but I kind of came to see how the language papers do have a social science aspect on top of kind of looking at the study of language. So I think that's been something that's really enjoyable and beneficial to me, because I realised that I can't always do things that I'm strictly comfortable with. Sometimes you do have to take risks and push yourself a little bit.
Because I think, did you do the language paper in Lent, which is a combination of kind of education, sociology, and language
and
learning?
It brought in policy as well, which was also really interesting. So yeah, it was a great opportunity.
Yeah. And what about you, Jaden? Is there anything that springs to mind when we think about what, you've said quite a lot already about what this interdisciplinary curriculum has offered you. But if you were going to try and sell interdisciplinary learning to someone, what would be your big positive that you would highlight?
I think the moment I'd put into was a supervision on Windrush poetry. And in that supervision, I got to mix kind of close textual analysis through English literature, which was my favourite subject in school. Then we got to talk a bit about philosophy and kind of pain and suffering, and that was a really interesting element on that. And then we brought in kind of the historical aspect with the different acts that were passed and why this generation came into existence. And I think at the end of the supervision, when I was walking out, I was like, wow, we've actually kind of really looked at this subject from so many different ways. And I didn't know that history could have this kind of enhancing effect on my understanding of what happened. I really just thought history was kind of just like what happened and why.
One thing after another.
Yeah, and suddenly I was like, wow, like there are different interpretations as to why this happened, and that philosophy can actually influence the way you think about that. And so I think that supervision really, really kind of made me very grateful to actually have this style of education. I think from some of my other friends that do some other subjects, they don't get this kind of breadth, and they don't get the ability to kind of really just sit down for a moment and really attack a subject from different angles and go, wow, okay, this is really interesting. They just kind of have one kind of standard way of looking at it. And I think that supervision really, I remember I in my head I was like, wow, I'm really grateful to have this opportunity, basically.
I'm really glad to hear that. I mean, Alex, hearing this, are these things that you would have anticipated the students saying about the benefits of the programme?
Yeah, I think. I mean, I guess I'd hoped that they would. I think probably at the time that I was designing the curriculum, I'll be honest with you and say that I probably hadn't thought too much about this side of it.
Dare you?
I was so focused on just getting it done that I was just focused on when the classes would be happening and who would be teaching them and what the subject would be, rather than necessarily thinking about kind of what would be happening in that space and kind of the outcome. But that's a me problem rather than a kind of broader issue. I think probably the thing that I guess surprises me a little bit about it is how the students notice that liminal space that they're existing in. I guess I maybe didn't expect that students would notice that and that they would actually start to feed off it. Initially they notice it, they feel slightly uncomfortable, and then they start to see it as a positive. And I guess I initially didn't think that the students would necessarily see themselves in that space. I thought we might see them in it. But yeah, I think that the seeing students realise that space of not knowing and then navigating their way out of it, and then eventually finding that perhaps the path that they wanted to take was not the one that they expected, that has been really nice to see. And also seeing that students do take gambles has also been nice. It's nice to see a student that you thought was all in on Latin economy is taking a paper on romanticism and is reading romantic poetry and is doing it. That's really nice to see, and that's also what learning is as well. It's a type of play, and therefore giving students a little bit of space to actually have that play is really important.
I really like your land economist romantic. I think that's a hybrid we never knew we needed. I likewise, I think it's really exciting to hear you, both of your students, talk about this. The next thing I wanted to ask the students was about your extended projects, because you mentioned that, and you, Jaden, have just said that actually it's been really amazing preparation for this year doing history. So if you don't mind, could you tell us what you did your extended project on for the foundation year?
Mine was about racial rhetoric in the media. And so essentially it was about how your choice of words, so if you have two synonyms, choosing one over the other can have a really big impact in the way that people are influenced, or how this travels, or even just generally in terms of upheaval in society. So I just looked at specific shows like the Today Show, and I looked at how when certain things were reported, if a word was used or a word wasn't used, what impact that could have on social media. That's what I tried to do.
Yeah, and when you were writing that, did you have this is in the past, right? So this is you accessing your memories right now, but when you were putting it together, were you actively thinking about different disciplines, or was it kind of a weaving together of different disciplinary perspectives? Because you've already spoken about philosophy and history kind of working together, and this seems like that to me. Was it very much kind of a blend?
Yeah, I think funnily enough, I think I didn't mean for it to be a blend, but I think it just naturally came through having done the foundation year for 2 terms. And so, yeah, there were definitely different aspects where, to set the scene, I kind of looked a bit at the history, and then when you really go into the analysis, that's where the social sciences came in. And with the conclusion and looking kind of on, that's where the philosophy came in. So, yeah, I think there was definitely a blend of different things.
Yeah. And what about you, Elijah? This is a very recent happening for you. You handed in very recently, so apologies for having to dredge it all up again. But what was yours on?
So I love any opportunity to talk about my extended project.
Amazing.
I really enjoyed writing it. So it was on the effectiveness of selective university outreach. And initially, when I wrote the outline for my project, I thought I was going to be analysing the initiatives themselves. But I actually found that I really took the opportunity to dive into the methodologies of evaluation and kind of look at the statistics and the ideologies lying behind outreach. So I found it really interesting, and I think it really taught me about how your project might not follow the initial outline that you set, but it's okay to explore and look at different views of the project. And yeah, it was great.
And did you take the education paper?
Yes.
Yeah. So was that influencing your take on the project?
It definitely influenced me, but I think I did come in with a really strong passion for outreach, and I work as an outreach ambassador both for the university and my college, so I think I also kind of brought that experience with me.
I see. And now, has it sort of changed the way that you think about the outreach you're doing, even as you're doing it?
I think it has, because I think especially diving into the history of outreach and the way that outreach policies came to be, it's really given me a new perspective. And I think as well, it's made me really admire outreach professionals and kind of the work that courses like the foundation year do as well. It's been really great.
Yeah, so it actually applied. It's a sort of applied piece of learning that you're learning in real time. It's a bit of a head spin, isn't it, when you're learning about the thing that you're doing, and it's difficult not to get inside your own head a bit. Okay, and going back to Alex, have there been things that have surprised you about the way that our cohorts have responded to either the EPs or the environment?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much that surprises me about the students, and they continue to surprise me, even though we're gearing up. This is the end of year 3. We've got a webinar tomorrow with the offer holders for year 4, but they continue to surprise me. I think there's quite a few things. I guess I haven't ever taught in secondary education, but I guess I kind of had a feeling that students had kind of felt a little bit kind of hamstrung sometimes by the things that they've done before. But I think what I hadn't prepared for was the way that it was an emotional certainty that was connected to the limitations of what they studied before, and that they wanted the certainty of knowing what the answer was. And I guess I hadn't quite appreciated how much of my time I was going to spend saying, well, it could be many things. There is no right answer, and let's talk about this. So I guess that's one thing that surprised me. I think on the flip side of that, I was surprised that once they could see that they were in that space of uncertainty, that they would actually really enjoy being in it, and that actually as soon as they got that, how rapidly they could improve. I think that's kind of one of the things that we see is there's a point almost where the switch flicks. Often it's kind of towards the end of Michaelmas term, the start of Lent term, the switch flicks and the student is like a different person. And I think the other thing probably that surprised me a lot was the way that many students changed their aspirations. We did deliberately kind of want to influence people to, not study law. Not that there's anything wrong with studying law, but it's a course that gets lots of applications, and we wanted to see students want to do subjects that they hadn't considered before, that they hadn't been exposed to before. But I think I maybe hadn't appreciated how much that would happen, and how we weren't forcing people to do it. They were kind of doing the work themselves and ending up doing different things. We had a student in the first year who arrived and told me they were definitely doing law. They started learning Latin, kind of just on the side, I guess, as sort of something that they thought would be kind of interesting as like a sort of fun hobby. And then they've ended up going on to classics, and they love classics. And it just sort of, the way that students would respond to being challenged in that way, I think was a really pleasant surprise to see. And the impact of that is that, you know, these students are going to have different study experiences, different careers, ultimately, because of the things that they have done themselves on the foundation year with us behind them.
That's pretty amazing. I was struck by what you were saying about basically you're narrating the transition between A-level and university learning, and A-level, you know, unavoidably, because there's not the time or space or resources to teach students the texts themselves. You're having to often give off the peg content, as you say, learning a concept, learning how it fits in a particular paradigm. Whereas you're right here, that Michaelmas uncertainty that you were speaking of earlier, Elijah, and that sense of finding your place, Jayden, that you were saying you're not sure which subject you belong to for a while. I think all of that is happening, isn't it, over the whole course of the year that students study with us in the foundation. You're having to work out, how do I go about my studies? I'm now reading sources, I'm reading primary material, I'm engaging with objects. If you're doing your material sources, I'm looking at data, and what do I think? What do I make of it? You know, it's not what the syllabus is telling me to think, it's what I think. And there's all of that going on, as you say, alongside the aspirational stuff that's going on. What careers are we heading towards? What do I want to spend my time studying? So there's a lot going on, never mind all of this interdisciplinary stuff we've been talking about as well.
Yeah, and it feels like giving students permission to do those things, so giving students permission to do the work that they are tempted to do. They sometimes hover almost at the door, and kind of encouraging them to come on into the room and just get stuck in. And that then gives them permission to rethink the things that they have thought previously about ways of knowing and about what it means to be a good university student and what critical thinking means and what a good essay looks like. Once you give them permission to start kind of recognising that the ways of knowing that they had before were maybe not working for them or it's not serving them at this point, that then unleashes a whole waterfall of kind of the potential that they have. And yeah, I think, you know, and that's the thing that I know the teaching team certainly find best about the kind of teaching that we do through seminars, through supervisions. Those are the spaces where most of that is happening. Lectures are great because it saves students having to do so much reading, right? But, you know, ultimately it's the discursive aspect of the learning that's giving the students permission to develop. And that's the point where you start to see them get excited and you start to see things clicking.
I really love the discussion element, I must say. You're right, Alex. It's where all the fireworks happen, isn't it? It's where you see the minds being changed and moved and all of this sort of stuff. The two final questions I've got here are actually questions that we've talked about a bit already, but I'm gonna put them on the table for us just to see if there's any sort of last thoughts we might have about them. Because the first one was going to be to Jayden and Elijah, and it was going to be, has learning in an interdisciplinary environment affected the way that you think? And I know you've already talked a little bit about this, but was there anything else you wanted to say? Has it affected the way that you think?
I think I've become a little bit more used to being asked really difficult questions, because I think, especially at A-level, the arguments are kind of already there. You're kind of just repeating things. But I think when you're adapting to a new subject, people are going to ask you really difficult questions and challenge you quite a lot more. And it's made me a lot more critical in the way I think, which has been really useful. Yeah,
I think building from what Elijah said, I've become a lot more flexible or agile in my thinking. I think anytime I get a question now, there is not a kind of set, regurgitated answer that I'm inclined to give. I'm really trying to think of the different ways that I could approach it potentially. And I think that comes through the interdisciplinary training that I've had.
That's really amazing. I mean, even as a teacher as well, because we teach with colleagues in completely different disciplines, we often become the student sometimes. It's been really interesting, you know, if I teach a material sources paper with our colleague Corinne, who's a archaeologist, she will walk into a building like King's College Chapel, and the way that she looks at the building is entirely different to the way that I, as a sort of theologian philosopher who deals mainly with text, looks at the building. And you're then starting to do what you guys are saying, and you, Jayden, were saying, more flexible. You're learning that this is not the only way of looking at something, isn't it? You're learning learning that other people may look differently at it. And then you have to learn the principles, as the foundations, as why they're looking at the building in the way that they do. So it's fun to sort of hear you talk like this, because I think us as a teaching team, I don't know if Alex has the same experience, but I've learned a lot about how I might teach in a different way, purely because I've seen my colleagues teaching from different disciplinary perspectives.
Every day is a school day. And I think for the teaching team as well, there's not really any of the papers probably that is squarely what someone has researched in the past. I mean, I know that sometimes people try and insert the things that they know about already to make it a little bit easier. But the reality is that all of the teaching team are teaching outside of their specific disciplinary knowledge. There is no Northern Irish poetry module, as much as I would like there to be one. So we're having to push ourselves as well. And then in doing that, we're feeding off each other. And yeah, definitely there's a lot of conversations where, we are sort of saying, wow, I have never thought about it in that way. And that's a good thing.
It is a very good thing. My final question was one that actually you have foreseen, Alex, because I was going to ask whether students who finish the FY, do they finish wanting to study the same subject as they start with? And you've already said that.
Well, yeah, I can add a bit more on that, I guess. I mean, so probably on average, we're getting to about a third of students are changing their subject aspirations. Some years, like in Jayden's year, there was quite a lot of change, and in the past 2 years, it's been slightly less. But on average, probably about a third of them end up doing something different to what they arrived thinking they wanted to do. And I think even where the students may end up on a specific course, it could be a tripos here, it could be a course elsewhere, I think we also give them the confidence to do things that go beyond, the kind of the simple path. So, I mean, Jayden talked about taking a philosophy paper that's kind of a borrowed paper. So he's choosing something deliberately because he thinks it's something that's going to interest him. Students that end up going elsewhere, they might end up taking joint degree courses because they're interested. They realise that they are interested in history and politics. Or we've also seen students who go elsewhere taking liberal arts type courses, which allow much more of that kind of pick and mix kind of approach than you can get here at Cambridge. So I think that's the other aspect, is that students are given that permission to do those things, and therefore they kind of carry that through. And I think just overall, I think that interdisciplinary learning at a relatively kind of early stage, I mean, we have talked about this before, about, quite often you see interdisciplinary master's courses or interdisciplinary PhD projects, but you don't necessarily see it at level 4, which is what we're teaching. I think by doing it at level 4, I think we're giving students the confidence to start to recognise that there aren't these kind of firm walls between subjects, and that actually they can pick things from another subject that will make them a better student in the subject that they are studying.
Yeah, and I'd love to hear from Jayden and Elijah your experiences of how you, well, in Jayden's case, you moved around subjects a little bit, didn't you? But I would like to hear as well if Elijah was ever tempted away from education.
I don't think I was ever tempted away from education. I think, if anything, it kind of reinforced my passion for education, because I think, as I mentioned before, education is inherently a very interdisciplinary subject. So I think enjoying learning all of the different disciplines on the foundation year kind of reinforced that education was something I was interested in. But I think what it has done as well is kind of encourage me to look at different extracurriculars. Like, I recently took on a voluntary position where I kind of look at how education is applied to museums and kind of young people's space in museums education and curation. And I think that's something that I'd never previously thought about, but the foundation year really empowered me to kind of explore different things outside of the classroom. So.
Yeah, I came here wanting to do law, and then I very quickly actually did law in the paper, and I was like, this is quite boring. I don't really want to spend the next 3 years of my life doing this. And even though I do have aspirations of doing law in the future, I think the key thing that the interdisciplinarity education gave me is seeing subjects not as like an end to a mean, but actually just kind of things that enrich my lived experience. And so then I started to think, okay, what would I actually enjoy doing while I'm at Cambridge? Like, what degree can I look back in 50 years and go, wow, that was a really fun 3 years that I had learning X thing. And so I think that's what it gave me. I definitely did switch around quite a lot, but I think I've ended up where I should be, so that's good.
excellent news for everyone. Thank you all so much. I learned a lot from our discussion, and thank you for being the first sort of victims in our podcast series on this topic. So thank you very much, all of you.